As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So 6 senior House Democrats sent a letter to President Biden on Saturday urging him to invoke U.S. foreign assistance laws to suspend military aid to Israel due to the country's starvation blockade on Gaza. So this letter said, quote, "Given the catastrophic and devolving situation in Gaza, we urge you to enforce Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act and, as required by that law, make clear to the Israeli government that so long as Israel continues to restrict the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the continued provision of U.S. security assistance to Israel would constitute a violation of existing U.S. law and must be restricted," end quote. So this section of the Foreign Assistance Act that they are citing says that no assistance shall be given to any country when it is made known to the president that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts the transport of delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. And it says if they restrict it directly or indirectly. And of course, the U.S. knows that Israel is restricting aid shipments. That's why they started airdropping aid into Gaza. That's supposedly why Biden ordered this pier to be built so they could deliver aid from the sea. Israel's blockade and restrictions on aid have put Gaza's population on the brink of famine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently acknowledged that 100% of Gaza's population is experiencing severe levels of acute food insecurity, but the Biden administration continues to provide this unconditional military support. So on Saturday, President Biden signed a $1.2 trillion government funding package that was passed by the House and the Senate at the last minute to avert a partial government shutdown. And so this is, the annual spending bill. It includes the annual military spending bill, which has the $3.8 billion that Israel gets each year. So Israel's still getting that money despite the atrocities that they're committing in Gaza. And this bill also officially cut funding for the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, and this cut comes as Gaza is on the brink of famine. So the U.S. provides Israel with this $3.8 billion in military aid each year under a 10-year memorandum of understanding that was signed by the Obama administration. The $3.8 billion is divided into 2 categories. You have the $3.3 billion in foreign military financing, and that's a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to purchase American weapons. And then there's also $500 million to fund Israeli missile defense systems. So AIPAC, the pro-Israel American lobby group, they celebrated that this money was included in the funding bill that Biden signed. And it's interesting what they said. I'll just read what they put on Twitter. They said, quote, "Congress just passed and President Biden signed into law $3.3 billion in vital security assistance for Israel without added political conditions," end quote. So they're happy that there's no conditions, no added conditions. It's still unconditional aid. And then something that happened on Friday that was kind of overshadowed by the terrorist attack. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Russia was in a state of war in Ukraine. And that is significant because Russia has always referred to the war as a special military operation. So Peskov actually said that this doesn't mean that there's any legal changes. It's still a special military operation, but he's saying we are in war. It has turned into war for us. He said, quote, "We are in a state of war. Yes, it started out as a special military operation, but as soon as this group was formed, when the collective West became a participant in this on the side of Ukraine, it became a war for us," end quote. His comments came as Russia was ramping up missile strikes in Ukraine in what was seen as retaliation for Ukrainian forces stepping up attacks on Russian territory. And I've covered this. There's been a lot of drone attacks, raids by these militants, these so-called Russian volunteers who have been launching ground attacks into Belgrade and Russian border regions, and also the artillery shelling of Belgrade and other border regions. Remember, Russia was saying they're going to evacuate 9,000 children from the border areas. Ukrainian officials said that Russia's missile strikes on Friday were one of the heaviest attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure of the war. They said that 5 people were reported killed and over 1 million experienced blackouts. So the heavy missile strike also comes as Western leaders have been speaking more openly about NATO's involvement in the war. So this also could be a response to all that bellicose rhetoric we're seeing from Macron about sending troops to Ukraine, this really insane stuff. So, and I think we should be very concerned that if Russia determines Ukraine was responsible for a terrorist attack like that, how they could escalate things here. Because if they think Ukraine was behind it, then they think the U.S., the West, NATO was behind it, they could really escalate this. There's also the crackpot theory that it was a Russian false flag, which I've seen from some Ukrainians say that Russia has no reason to do anything like that. I mean, they don't need any pretext to escalate the war in Ukraine. They have plenty of pretext. They wouldn't need a big massacre like this.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
I guess if nothing else, I'd say it's kind of another reminder of how dangerous these situations are, and how the idea of being in a war of choice with Russia is so, again, it kind of reminds me of when those missiles went off in Poland, and immediately Zelensky was claiming this was Russia. It was an attack on NATO. People, senators and diplomats around the world were saying invoke Article 5, go to war with Russia right now. And then we find out it was Ukrainian missiles, whether intentionally or not intentionally, that hit Poland. And so everything calms down because it's okay. Ukraine's allowed to attack a NATO country. But you just see for a second there, like, oh, how dangerous this is. Like, what if those were Russian missiles that even accidentally hit Poland? And, oh, wow, we could be in a much worse situation very quickly. Likewise, something like this, you just go, well, look, if this was a U.S. or a U.S. related group, if this was a Ukrainian group, how easily this could lead to some type of escalation. As of right now, we really don't know who did it. It seems that there was some ISIS little group that claimed responsibility for it, but that in itself is hard to know for sure. There are some people who it apparently looks like were caught, which, man, talk about Daryl Cooper posted this. He goes, of all the people I wouldn't want to be in the history of the world, it might be someone who attempted to pull off a terrorist attack and escape in Vladimir Putin's Russia. I don't know who is behind this. I have seen nothing in the realm of evidence presented to suggest who is behind this. It does seem that the Russian government is already hinting at blaming Ukraine for it. They put out a couple statements about how the terrorists were trying to flee toward the Ukrainian border, and a couple other statements like that. Now, of course, that doesn't in any way suggest, you can't trust the Russian government any more than you can trust any other government. That doesn't mean it was Ukrainians who did it. That simply means, for whatever reason, whether it's because it was Ukrainians or for other strategic reasons, Russia would like to blame Ukraine for this. Probably my guess is that, and this is purely speculation, but my guess is that Russia does not want to have another war on its hands now. They'd probably rather just blame the people they're already at war with, because this is a big enough terrorist attack. I think there were over 100 people were slaughtered. And in that case, someone like Vladimir Putin has to respond in some way. That's the whole appeal of a right-wing strongman, is that they respond to things like this. So anyway, we'll keep our eye on this story. I don't know that there's much more than that, but if you have any thoughts, go ahead, Rob.
I agree 100% that the escalations just aren't good, and that this is why you shouldn't, have quasi wars with people. If you look back, remember that phony news story when they were saying that Putin was paying people who were killing our soldiers?
In Afghanistan, yes, the bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers, yes.
Right, and it's like, well, what are we doing in Ukraine when we send them gear to go kill Russians? And then you see an escalation like this, where my first thought was, ISIS seems to be this destabilizing force that sometimes even exists in the U.S. interest of destabilizing. And so when I saw the name, I was like, I bet that's going to be us. But then I remembered that Putin was in Syria kicking ISIS's ass, so they might have a reason to attack. And then also, even if Russia's saying, hey, this was Ukraine, that could be just to drum up more support for the war in their own country. Sure. So I think this is, in terms of who done it, it's anyone's game.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, Vladimir Putin is certainly, or at least he's said, I don't know, I shouldn't say he's under the impression, but he has said that he's under the impression that, like, he said this in the Oliver Stone interview, where he said something like, it does seem more convenient that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are always doing the U.S.'s bidding. That's kind of his thing. And right. Of course, as people do know, we do have a history of funding and arming and training these organizations. Now, I think the truth is not quite as neatly tied into a conspiracy. I think that we have funded and armed these groups when we think it's in our interest. Even post 9/11, as in Syria. But if you listen, I think basically the whole thing, if you ever listen to John Kerry, who's on that, in fact, let's see if we could find that, Brian. There's the John Kerry hot mic, or maybe hot mic, maybe secret recording. Anyway, I'll see if I can find the recording, but there's this part of it where John Kerry basically says that as they were sending the funding into Syria, they saw the rise of ISIS. And they thought that would put pressure on Assad to cut a deal or step down or something like that. And so they were like, okay, like, we know the money and weapons are falling into ISIS's hands, but like, let's do this because it'll work. And then when ISIS
went the other way.
Huh?
They turned around and went the other way.
That's right. And so when ISIS turned around and invaded Iraq, John Kerry's like, we were all like, what? No, that's not what you were supposed to do. So anyway, much like there's lots of examples like this, but like things like, when CNN is all like covering for the Summer of Love and how the riots are the voice of the unheard, and then they start smashing up the CNN building, like that wasn't part of the plan. That part wasn't part of what they were going for. But human beings do have agency. And even when you're trying to manipulate human beings toward your end, that doesn't mean they can't turn around and then decide they have their own, interests or their own plans. So to me, that's more accurate than just the clear, conspiracy of it. However, look, there's no question. Vladimir Putin's had an issue with radical Islamist groups for a long time. And he certainly killed a whole lot of people in Syria. And he's fought wars in Chechnya and stuff. Like he's got enemies there, and this is a problem they've had for a while. So it's certainly plausible that could be they could be the culprits in this. It's just that we don't know yet, but we will find out hopefully at some point, and we will keep you guys updated on that situation. All right.
Anyways, here from number 6, he's talking about these pretend Federalists. He said some of the advocates specifically. So when people say that the anti-Federalists thought all the Federalists were liars and scammers and tricking them, this is not the case. But there certainly were very powerful ones that took that position. Some of the advocates, I believe, will agree to recommend good amendments, but some of them will only consent to recommend indefinite, specious, but unimportant ones. So he's like, 3 states have ratified by this point, by Christmas of 1787. And so our goal is mostly shifted to, well, what can we do with the proposed system? What can we amend to make it a little safer than what it is right now? Because it's so poorly defined with phrases like general welfare and necessary and proper, etc. And he's saying some of the advocates will be on board. These are some of the Federalists. They'll be on board with giving good recommendations for amendments. Others are going to try to get more poorly defined ones because their goal really is just to scam everybody and then expand power once things are in effect. And that's how things definitely played out, especially in 1791. He said, and this only with a view to keep the door open. So again, some of the advocates are going to recommend, he believes, good amendments. Others, indefinite, specious, and unimportant ones. And this only with a view to keep the door open for obtaining in some favorable moment their main object, a complete consolidation of the states and a government much higher toned, less Republican, and less free than the one proposed. So even though it's being described this way, he's saying, and he said this in previous letters as well, that even though they're describing it this way, we can understand what the legal meaning of these phrases are. People with power are always going to try to find some wiggle room to expand that power. Then he goes into this. The supreme power is in the people, and rulers possess only that portion which is expressly given them. So many of the anti-federalists, of course, were in support of a reiteration of part of the Articles of Confederation, basically Article 2, that said any power that's not been expressly delegated to them is automatically reserved to the states or to the people. And so they were really the precursor to what became the 10th Amendment. He wanted limited delegated powers. And then more on that line, he said the wisest people have often declared this is the case on proper occasions and have carefully formed stipulations to fix the extent and limit the exercise of the power given. Again, you have to be very clear about what they're authorized to do because as we see all the time now, anytime they have any type of wiggle room, they will always expand their power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We're all familiar with that phrase, but power always grows. As Abigail Adams so rightly put it, she said, power, whether vested in many or a few, is ever grasping, and like the grave cries, give, give. She understood this, and I think most of the founding generation did, and that's probably why the federal farmer is saying, well, if you're not wanting to be super clear about what's going on here, I can't really trust you, and that's why he's saying some of them were really fake Federalists. In his 7th paper, the federal farmer really focuses heavily on this concept of the people not being represented. It's impossible to represent people. Now, I've read a little bit of Rothbard, too, and I seem to remember something out of that, well, if you have one person trying to claim the interests of 10 different individuals even, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but this is my take on it. But basically, it's really impossible to send somebody over there to properly represent the interests of people because, well, people change their minds and every person is different. Now, you got to get as close to that as possible in a system like this. And, well, if you're one in every 30,000 or so, tens of thousands of people, you're really nowhere close. Unless, of course, the society has, well, all the same type of people in it. That's not the place that we are at all today. So in his 7th paper, the federal farmer really focused heavily on this concept of representation, saying that it was totally inadequate and will result because of this in a government based on force. Because if you have 10 people who want a certain thing, but you're only representing they're only making up like 1% or 10% of the people that are being properly represented of their views in the House of Representatives in Congress, well, then those people have to live under force. They don't get their views. They don't get any say whatsoever. And this is very similar to the case made by Brutus in his fourth anti-federalist paper a few weeks earlier. He predicted that this kind of scenario would lead to corruption and bribery, because the only way to get your stuff done, the only way to get your views through if you're not properly represented is through bribery. And then you're going to have a lot of corrupt people. It's going to draw those type of people to the top. And he said, and rather than resulting in a free government, it would lead to one of consolidation, force, and coercion. So we can see some very strong similarities between the Brutus anti-federalist letters and what Federal Farmer wrote just weeks later. But prior to that, even Cato had a very similar take in his third paper. This was in October of 1787. He said that a consolidated government would never be able to properly represent the views of people in different states. And again, that would only result in an institution based on force. And don't you feel that at every point today? Now it's just one side or the other trying to control the entire system. Basically, a handful of people, if you're thinking about just a few hundred people, making decisions for hundreds of millions of people only guarantees that almost everyone is going to be unhappy with their results. Even the people whose team is in charge, they're not happy with their team either. And then when it comes to choosing which team is going to be in charge next round every few years, they're not really for anybody. They generally are using their vote in a defensive manner. Well, I hate these people because they've been awful. I'm going to support these people, even though, well, these people are terrible as well. And maybe they're not even paying attention because they're so against what they have now. If you think about the current scenario, a lot of people, again, I'm going to go back to the Second Amendment, the natural right of self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms. You basically have people thinking that supporting one gun grabber over another is the way to protect the Second Amendment. And this couldn't be further from the truth. It only guarantees that it's going to get attacked more and more and more.
There was a horrible terror attack. I don't know if you saw some of the footage over the weekend, Dr. Paul, but near Moscow. Awful. At least 4 gunmen went into a concert, into a mall, and they slaughtered, now it looks like around 150 people in cold blood. Nasty, awesomely horrific, and then they burned the thing down. So within a few minutes, the U.S. knew who didn't do it. It wasn't Ukraine. It was ISIS. They knew immediately. They immediately had all that information. Ironically, after 18 months, we still don't know who did the Nord Stream 2, but they knew immediately. But I'm just going to throw this out there, Dr. Paul, because let's have a look at Victoria Nuland, who had a hasty exit from government just a few weeks ago. I find very suspicious. Let's listen to an audio. This is Victoria Nuland in January of 22, just before, a few months before Nord Stream was blown up. You might want to put on your earpiece, Dr. Paul, and listen to Victoria Nuland talking about Nord Stream.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
And a few months after that, Nord Stream 2 did not move forward because it was blown up, but we don't know who did it.
How did she know that?
She's amazing. She's a clairvoyant. And here's what she said just a few days before the terror attack in Moscow. Let's do the first one. There's 2 of her talking about this. Let's hear this.
Mr. Putin's going to get some nice surprises on the battlefield, and that Ukraine will make some very strong success this year.
So just a few, stop it. So just a few days before this attack, she says Putin's going to get some nasty surprises. And do this next one. She said this, I think in the same week she addressed the CSIS and said, listen to this one, Dr. Paul.
With this money, Ukraine will be able to fight back in the east, but it will also be able to accelerate the asymmetric warfare that has been most effective on the battlefield. And as I said in Kyiv 3 weeks ago, this supplemental funding will ensure Putin faces some nasty surprises on the battlefield.
Just before the
with
attack,
this money,
she says that the money to Ukraine is going to help them with asymmetric warfare, which is what this is, and give him some nice surprises. So, and then boom, here comes the terror attack.
Well, I guess there's no doubt about it. She has been very significant, but we, even before 2014, we talked about her, but really in 2014, we knew what she was up to. She's a promoter of war.
Yeah.
And she's bipartisan. And she comes across as being very fair-minded, saving the world.
Yeah.
What a tragedy.
And we don't know that she's behind this, but we do know that she somehow seems to make great predictions of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Mayhem follows her. So,
but I guess it's the Russian government that paraded some people on a stage and said these guys confessed they did it.
Yeah, yeah, they caught him. I mean, they caught him on their way to Ukraine, but then they said Ukraine has nothing to do with it. Then why would they be going toward Ukraine? It doesn't make any sense. They
Like
said
you say, maybe they'll get to the bottom of it. I always say, if they do it now, they still should do it because history can be of some value someday. You know, it takes a long time for us to wake up. So that's why I think accurate history is so vital.
Yeah, and I would hate to be these guys. Obviously, they were beat up. You know, there's no question about it. The Russians treat terrorist suspects very, very nastily. But we have to remember Abu Ghraib, where we treated people we thought were terrorists pretty badly too. So I'm going to close out with another little bit of kind of breaking news. I didn't mention it to you, but I know that you'd want our audience to hear this. Now, Stella Assange, Julian's wife, just tweeted this out before we started the show. If you can do that last clip, please. She said, this is it. Decision tomorrow, 10:30 a.m., Royal Courts of Justice. She just released this. The Royal Court of Justice is going to make its decision on Julian Assange tomorrow at 10:30 a.m., I guess local London time. So if you are a praying person, I would suggest that might be a good idea. If you have other ways of influencing things, that may be a good idea as well. At the very least, those who aren't either could cross their fingers and hope that justice will be served.
Boy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Let's hope.
It's a lot better than it was many years. He had to just sit and nobody saying a word about him.
Yeah.
So bringing up the subject of the financing bill that is threatening all of the Western Hemisphere and the world, the financial system. Spend, no matter how much, trillions and trillions of dollars. But there are some good things that come of it. And I'm being sarcastic. New government spending bill bans U.S. embassies from flying the pride flag. Oh, don't we believe in free speech anymore? You know? But here it is. United States have permitted the pride flag to at the embassies to fly pride flag and the American flag. I'm sure they didn't take the American flag down. Maybe it was down a little bit or something. But it's so crazy. But you know, the Speaker of the House gets credit for it. He negotiated this. He got him to talk. He said, "Look, we need to get as many votes as we can. And if we do this, we can get some conservatives saying that is a good idea, as if this is the issue." So this is in a rumor mill. You know, I don't think we have this in print, but I happen to believe it probably is true. So he did that. He got a couple people saying, "Well, this is really good. We can brag about that," and he can get some of his credentials back. But then the end of the story is that the rumor mill said, "Oh, yes, but don't worry about it. They've agreed to let us, put it back in later on, or get rid of it later on, and so that they can fly those flags." And it's sort of in the category of letting these weird foreign leaders come and get the podium in the House of Representatives and represent dignity and democracy and all that. So anyway. Keep an eye on the pride flags. They may be going up again. If somebody wants to decorate their house and not damaging to private property next door, let them fly their flag, but not in our embassies. That doesn't make a lot of sense.